What's up, design family, and welcome back to another episode of Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you back on the channel. On today's episode, we'll be looking at how yarn is actually processed when it comes to textile production purposes. So, in short, a yarn is a long, continuous strand of interlocked fibers, and the ways in which we actually interlock those fibers is what creates the different types of yarn productions that we're going to be discussing on today's episode. There are going to be 4 key types of ways to put yarns together from fibers, and that's exactly what we're going through. Each of these 4 different types is going to have its own characteristics. It's going to have specific types of fibers that can be used in this type of production, and ultimately it's going to have its own specific use case scenario. So the goal of this episode and what you'll walk away with is a much better understanding of these 4 different types of production methods and what each of them entails, so where you can actually use each of these methods. Buckle up, this is going to be a short episode, but a good episode, so you guys are in for a good one. What's up, design family, and welcome to Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you here. On this channel, we discuss all things sports fashion, graphic design, manufacturing, and technology. We'll discuss key topics, answer pressing questions, and provide actionable steps on starting your own product line. If you're interested in any of the above topics, stick around. You're in for a good one. Getting right into it, I mentioned that there are 4 different types of yarns, and I'll list them out before we get started and then go through each of them one by one. I'll observe the types of fibers that can be actually used in each of these methods. We'll look at the length of the typical fiber, and ultimately we'll evaluate the characteristics. So we have the carded, combed, woolen, and finally worsted types of yarns. The first method that I'm going to be discussing is the carded method. So in short, this one is a low-cost yarn production method that actually creates or ends up creating a fuzzy yarn that's extremely suitable for lightweight fabrics. When it comes to the types of fibers that we can use for carded yarns, well, definitely we're going to be able to use cotton, waste silk, plant fibers, wool fibers, and specific types of synthetic staple fibers. When it comes to the length of fibers that we're able to use in this production method, well, really you can use pretty much anything. You can use short, medium, and long length fibers, so there's a lot of variability in this case. And lastly, when it comes to the characteristics, this one is quite simple. It's producing non-uniform, so it has a non-uniform shape. It's usually coarser to the touch, so a fabric that uses carded yarns is going to be a lot more rough and coarser. And lastly, it's going to have an easy shrink characteristic. So these types of textiles that use corded types of yarns are going to be easily shrinkable, so definitely bear that in mind. Number 2 on our list is the combed yarn. This one, in short, is a more expensive yarn production process, but ultimately it creates a smoother and much softer yarn. This method includes the carding process and is additional, or it creates additional processes that end up in more waste, hence the additional cost. When it comes to the types of fibers that we can use for combed yarns, definitely we're going to be looking at fine cottons and any other fibers that we result in after the carding process. And we end up creating long staple fibers with this method, and usually long staple fibers are of a higher quality of hand feel than these shorter staple fibers. They just feel better and they have a more lustrous appearance. So characteristics wise, we're going to get a straight and extremely aligned fiber from this method. We're going to have a soft and smooth to the touch fabric that's used or that's made when we actually use these types of yarns. And lastly, the types of garments that we're going to get are extremely lustrous in their appearance, and you're going to get a lot of positive benefits out of it despite the additional cost. Number 3 on our list is going to be the woolen production method. This one is going to end up in woolen threads that have uneven fibers that are made from carded and uneven fibers. When it comes to the types or the length of fibers that we're going to get out of this, we're going to get a mix between 25.4, so on the lower end you're going to have a 25.4 millimeter all the way up to a 76.2 millimeter short fiber. Characteristics wise, woolen fibers or woolen yarns are going to be bulky and uneven. They're going to be slackly twisted, and lastly they're going to be soft and hairy. So when it comes to the specific use case scenario for a woolen yarn, definitely avoid it on garments that require much more of a uniform and even appearance, and it's going to be a lot more suitable on sweaters, outerwears, things like knitwear where that fuzzy appearance is going to feel right at home. Last but definitely not least, on our list of 4 different types of yarns, we have the worsted yarn. Worsted yarns are essentially combed wool yarns that are made from parallel wool fibers. When it comes to the length of the fibers here, we mentioned in the previous section that, well, what we have as woolen yarns range from 25.4 to 76.2. That 76.2 cutoff is specifically for worsted yarns, where after that you're dealing with worsted yarns. So the length of the fibers of worsted yarns are 76.2 millimeters and above, and are considered long staple fibers, or will use long staple fibers. Characteristics wise here is we get a yarn that's extremely fine and even, that's tightly twisted, and lastly is soft and hairy. So this is a great alternative to the woolen yarn, and you can still use it on outerwear apparel or on outerwear apparel that requires a bit more of a compacted surface look. Well, that is a wrap on this episode, guys. We've gone through the 4 different types of yarn production processes. To recap, we have the carded yarns, combed yarns, woolen yarns, and lastly, we have the worsted yarn. By now, you should have a much better understanding of what each of those 4 actually mean and what specific scenarios each is going to be the best suited for. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, please consider smashing a massive thumbs up. It really helps us out, and it lets us know that you're enjoying the content and encourages us to keep pushing out more. Guys, if you want to learn more about different types of yarns, different types of fibers, definitely consider subscribing to our channel. We put out great content on a week-to-week basis, and we'd love for you to join us along for the ride. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Fittdesign TV. Until next time, stay awesome.